From the CISO Series, it's Cybersecurity Headlines.
Microsoft says Russians used previously identified tactic in senior exec email breach. Is the future of cybersecurity more human than we thought? And PixPirate raises the bar for banking Trojans. These are some of the stories that my colleagues, our guests, and I have selected from this past week's cybersecurity headlines. We took a look at everything in there. It was like a big deli case. We picked everything out, quarter pounds here, eighth pounds here. We made a delicious sandwich. We were economical with it. And we are ready to share some insight, opinion, and expertise on these stories and more that our guest, Mary Rose Martinez, the VP and CISO at Marathon, helped pick out. Mary Rose, thank you so much for being here.
Happy to be here, Rich. Happy Friday.
Happy Friday. I cannot wait to dig into the news from this past week. A lot of big stories here.
Sorry, start it again. You're off the microphone, Rich. I can't have this keep going on.
Okay,
I'm sorry. You're off the microphone. Do it again. Sorry, everybody. We're going to go again.
All right, hold on. Let me just make sure I have my audio. I don't know how that happened. Does this sound like I'm on the correct mic now? Okay, thank you. No, I am not on the right. Don't know what's happening. Just 1 second. Because this is weird because I hear it in my ears. Sounds very far away. Okay. Well, let's. All right. I'm just looking at all my audio settings. Make sure. Does this sound any better? Is that way too loud? Anyone? Steve, can you just come on real quick? Steve Prentice, can you just come on the stream real quick?
Yes, you sound better now.
Is it coming through?
Yep, you sound much better now.
Okay, so we are good to go. Sorry about that, Mary Rose.
It's good. It's the cinema verite version of the show. You get to see all the crew. So we're going to start again we'll leave the openings animation. We'll just start from after the animation with the headlines. So Rich, give me a moment to disappear and you can start the headlines and we'll run from there. And that's where we'll edit it in.
All right, sounds good. All right, so let's count it in 3, 2, 1. Microsoft says Russians used previously identified tactic in senior exec email breach. Is the future of cybersecurity more human than we thought? And PixPirate raises the bar for banking Trojans. These are some of these stories that my colleagues, our guest, and I have selected from this past week's cybersecurity headlines. We picked them out with delicacy. We found the diamonds in all of the cybersecurity rough, and we are now ready to get some insight, opinion, and expertise from that guest, Mary Rose Martinez, the VP and CISO at Marathon. Mary Rose, thank you so much for being here. Super excited. Mary Rose, can you hear me?
Happy.
We're
having connection issues, it seems like.
We are having some latency issues. This is the glory of the internet. Thank you, everybody, for sticking with us here. Mary Rose, can you refresh your browser real quick to see if that'll resolve?
Let me try that again.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Thanks, everybody, for sticking with us here. I am very excited to talk about the cybersecurity news of the week. This Microsoft story is just sitting here. It's waiting for me. Hello, Mary Rose. Are we back? How's the latency right now?
I think it's okay. I hope it holds up for the rest of these 20 minutes. Thank you to the audience for being so patient as we go through all these.
I'm going to have to sacrifice a goat to the VoIP gods. I must have offended them in some way because the packets are getting lost here. So Steve, I am going to go ahead and let's see here. All right. I'm going to set it up from the intro to the guest since we already have the headlines clean. So I will count us in and we'll be ready to go. All right. 3, 2, 1. These are some of the stories that my colleagues, our guest, and I have selected from this past week's cybersecurity headlines. And now we're going to get some insight, some opinion, and some expertise from our guest, Mary Rose Martinez, the VP and CISO at Marathon. Mary Rose, thank you so much for being here. It feels like I just saw you. Thanks for making time on this busy Friday.
Absolutely. So happy to be here.
All right, we are working through some latency issues here, but I think we're going to have some fun. And I just wanted to remind everybody listening and all the ships at sea that all of the opinions that Mary Rose is going to share on the show are her own and not hers of her employer or anyone else. They're just Mary Rose's, and they're going to be awesome. I can't wait to hear them. Also, what I can't wait to hear is more from our sponsor, Vanta, compliance that doesn't sock too much. We'll hear about more of them later in the show. Remember to join us on YouTube Live. We have a little bit of a chat party going on right now in our chat on YouTube. If you want to join it in, go to CISOseries.com, go to the events dropdown, look for that cybersecurity headlines week in review image, and click on it to join us. We've got CCL, we've got Sean Kelly, one of our cybersecurity headlines reporters in there. We've got David, and I think we saw, Michael Vinding in there as well. So get in there, get your comments going, any questions you have, what you think about the stories as we go through. We've got about 20 minutes, though, so let's jump right in. First up here, Microsoft says Russians used previously identified tactic in senior exec email breach. This is following up on an ongoing story regarding the Russian hackers' Midnight Blizzard breaking into the emails of senior Microsoft executives to read intel about themselves, very self-flattering, and Microsoft now says the attackers managed to pivot from non-production test accounts into ones used by senior leaders of the company by creating malicious OAuth applications. Okay, so Mary Rose, it's easy to pick on Microsoft here, a company where even 1% of its problems would, outnumber almost every other company out there. But this has appeared to be a legacy test OAuth application that gave attackers access to mailboxes. I'm curious, as a CISO, what goes through your mind when you hear stories about, legacy vulnerabilities still being exploited?
It's a weakness for all of us, quite frankly. I mean, vulnerability management is part of basic blocking and tackling, but gosh, there's just so many out there. And if you think about what is legacy, like a legacy time frame gets shorter and shorter if you think about it, right? As technology advances and as the attackers get creative, what is considered a vulnerability before may have been a vulnerability before becomes one now. So as an example, some of the techniques used in this particular one was, very tailored password spray, low number of attempts to evade detection. And that's just an example for this particular one. But point being is what may not have been a vulnerability before is one now. And so some of this basic blocking and tackling, we got to stay on top of it.
Yeah, and as much as it, we like to think Microsoft, they're one of the security, vendor titans out there. They're this giant company, but like, one, they've always, Microsoft dealing with legacy issues is like part of the DNA of that company. And also there's just so much for them potentially to miss that like, it's actually a credit to them. I guess that you haven't heard about this more. It's still a black eye, obviously not a reputational thing you want to hear about, but I guess you have to put it in the context, right? Of like, it's that fail once when it comes to all of these legacy vulnerabilities. And to your point, something that wasn't a vulnerability necessarily, any given time ago.
Exactly. If you just look at their spread, their infrastructure, it's already a challenge for smaller companies, much less company the size of Microsoft.
And Sean Kelly in our chat says, it is tough, though, for Microsoft to explain to their customers while touting their commitment to security. Yeah, that reputational damage might be the biggest thing that comes out of this for sure. The next story here, the future of cybersecurity is more human than you think. This comes from an article in Forbes this week. And thank you, Mary Rose, for recommending it, bringing it to our attention. And it points out that the rise of AI means conventional cybersecurity tactics are becoming less effective. The article points out increasing rates of anxiety among security specialists and other working people with regard to new phenomena, things like AI hallucinations and AI-generated malicious code that needs only to drive up to a company's that really only needs to drive up a company's operating costs and maybe sully its reputation to cause very tangible damage. The article calls for greater investment in the human side of cybersecurity. So, Mary Rose, article's message is pretty clear. I'm curious, though, what specifically about it speaks to you. All right. Well, Mary Rose will be joining us back here in just one moment. We're going to wait for her, and I will pose that again. A really fascinating. We will have the link to this article in the show notes, but just a really interesting take, I thought, on this from this Forbes article. So I really appreciate Mary Rose bringing that to our attention. Mary Rose, are we back?
We are back. We are just not lucky today, apparently.
We are not lucky, but we will soldier on, and we will be good. So I was just talking about this Forbes article, and kind of setting this up as the rise of AI means that conventional cybersecurity tactics are becoming less effective, and kind of the anxiety that we're seeing from security specialists, in regards to things that are very easy for AI to generate, but that all they have to do is just drive up a company's operating costs or do reputation damage to cause, very substantial impacts on them. And the article calling for greater investment in the human side of cybersecurity. I'm curious, what about that article spoke to you that you wanted to talk about on the show?
So when I first saw the article and I just saw the headline, I was thinking, oh, this is another article around human-centered cybersecurity. We all know the stats, right? The majority of breaches involve a human element. I mean, we have such a hyper-connected yet distributed world. There's a lot of emphasis now on the human perimeter. But what I liked about this particular article is that, again, with the promise and the unknowns and the threats of the unknowns of AI, it also highlighted the people themselves, the well-being of the defenders themselves, in terms of basically ensuring that they have that well-being in order to fight the good fight. So I thought it was a nice, maybe highlight or spotlight on something that we don't necessarily think about. I mean, cybersecurity is not for the faint of heart, as we all know. So it's good to have a reminder that the well-being of the defenders is just as important, especially in the environment that we live in today.
Yeah, and I think we're starting to see a little bit more awareness of the human impact when you have so much of personal identity for people that are working in cybersecurity, that are tied to company success or achieving the company mission when it comes to a security department, and that a breach, ransomware attack, whatever what it might be, but now it's AI causing all sorts of issues that those are not we like to call them soft costs, but those have real consequences for not just efficiency, but cost of life too. So yeah, for sure.
Yep.
All right. Next up here, PixPirate raises the bar for banking Trojans. Researchers at Trusteer, a security division of IBM, have been observing a new remote access Trojan attacking banks in Brazil. It's unique in its ability to automate the insertion of a malicious money transfer over the instant payment platform Pix. It's also capable of some pretty advanced capabilities, disabling Google Play Protect, intercepting SMS messages, preventing uninstallation, stealing passwords entered by users on banking apps, and resisting reverse engineering efforts. So, like I said, very sophisticated piece of software here, Mary Rose. I'm curious, how do CISOs cope with, kind of this unending creativity we see from threat actors in terms of adding to these capabilities, just finding ways, things like accessibility features to steal information that you enter in on a web page?
Yeah, I am simultaneously in fear and in awe, quite frankly, because of this, how creative people can get. But in short, how can we cope as a team? Essentially, we need to, we are all going to have to be on our toes, the entire defender community, right? But our team, ourselves, our teams, our service providers, and this for me just really highlights the importance of threat intel sharing and for all of us to be all in this together, because they can get really creative. So as much as we can share amongst ourselves, between private sector, public sector, again, amongst ourselves, so that we can fortify, if you will, our defenses. Because like I said, I when I see some of these things, I'm like, really? And it's like, oh, really? So you have both.
Yeah. They have again, there are a lot of things stacked in their favor of you. Just got to get through once. You can have all this creativity. Yeah. Exactly. Intel sharing and that rising tide. We need to lift all the boats, folks. Come on. All right. Next up here, Mercedes-Benz exposes sensitive data and source code. Researchers at Red Hunt Labs discovered during a routine internet scan an authentication token belonging to a Mercedes employee that had been left exposed in a public GitHub repository. The GitHub token gave unrestricted and unmonitored access to the entire source code hosted at the internal GitHub enterprise server, as well as intellectual property, cloud access keys, blueprints, design documents, and single sign-on passwords, otherwise known as pretty bad stuff. So Mary Rose, although this problem has been fixed, it's an embarrassing error for the company. And I would say for GitHub, which is increasingly trying to add more controls to not let you do this kind of stuff. I'm curious, what's your take on this?
this is again back to cybersecurity 101, right? This is fundamentals, a public repository, secrets that are just exposed, right? I mean, some of these basic stuff, but what it highlights for me are two things. One is the continual element of education, right? Education on the humans, but it also highlights human nature. Folks might choose the easy path versus the secure path, and those are not necessarily one and the same. In fact, sometimes they're contradictory, but they're trying to get their job done. So they'll just go the easy path. I'm not just going to go do this, etc. And then there's like, oh, there's all these secrets that I have and that I'm exposing, and here's the actual impact. So in some ways, you can't necessarily fault somebody. In some ways, yeah, you can, because you should have known better. So it's really both. There's the education component, which I think we have to be relentless about, especially given the creativity we just talked about in terms of how cyber attackers can come in. But also, we're constantly battling human nature. It's going to be a constant battle, I'm afraid.
Yeah, I love that idea of at least having some empathy for the person just trying to get their job done and needing cybersecurity to kind of meet people there. Yes, obviously give them the awareness tools and stuff like that to know when something is it is not supposed to happen, but also design cybersecurity in a way that it's not seen as an impediment, something to work around, right? That's always the classic the classic example, right?
Yep.
All right, before we move on to our next story, we have to spend a few moments and talk today about our sponsor, Vanta. From dozens of spreadsheets and screenshots to fragmented tools and manual security reviews, managing the requirements for modern compliance and security programs is increasingly challenging. Vanta is the leading trust management platform that helps you centralize your efforts to establish trust and enable growth across your organization. Over 6,000 companies partner with Vanta to automate compliance, strengthen security posture, streamline security reviews, and reduce third-party risk. To learn more, go to vanta.com/CISO and watch their 3-minute product demo. All right, this is one of my favorite stories of the week. AI poisoning tools seize download surge. Last week, researchers at the University of Chicago released a tool called Nightshade, which serves to make image data useless for AI models that use such data for training. Nightshade makes invisible changes to pixels in an image that make reproduction by AI unpredictable. The idea being, if you don't want your data to be scraped for training, you could use this tool and you'd still be able to keep your content indexed on the open web, kind of have the best of both worlds there. So Mary Rose, sounds like the dawning of an age of maybe a more meaningful watermark situation here that might actually work. I'm curious though, any thoughts about potential weakness or problems that this kind of technology might pose?
I don't know about weaknesses or problems, but this story gives me a hope, gives me assurance that while there are folks who might want to take AI and use it for the negative, but there's also folks who are using it for the positive. Now, to be truly effective, I anticipate that this will go through some sort of maturity curve ability, right? So for right now, artists and publishers are downloading it to protect themselves. I think where this needs to go is really where we'll have the general public have access to this, but that still puts the onus on the general public to sort of protect their own original content, if you will. And I can foresee it go from artists and publishers very specific to sort of the general public, and perhaps at some point the onus really being on the content generating solution providers, if you will. So if I take a picture with my camera, should it have this already in place, this pixel manipulation, so that it cannot be manipulated from a Gen AI perspective. So I can see it going through that maturity curve. But for me, this gives me a story of hope that there are folks who are trying to address the potential threats of AI.
Yeah, and the University of Chicago specifically, they previously came out with their Glaze tool, and I like the idea of creating this toolkit. I absolutely think you're right, though. This kind of has to be defaults before we're going to see mass adoption, right? Like, most consumers aren't going to be like realize the importance of using this tool until it's either too late or they're impacted on it. Although CCL does point out this might help reduce deepfakes, especially for people that do have very serious either privacy or public image concerns or stuff like that. The more tools you have, the more awareness you have of that. Always good to see, and free download. So good on you, University of Chicago researchers. Next up here, more companies refuse to pay ransoms. The ransomware negotiation firm Coveware reports that in Q4 2023, a record low 29% of firms made payments to ransomware operators, down from 37% a year ago. The firm notes the rate of ransomware payments decreased steadily over the last 5 years, even in cases when threat actors exfiltrated data. That did not cause the payment rate to spike there. Kovor said the continued decline comes from mounting legal pressures on paying ransoms, a lack of trust in cyber criminals, and overall better preparedness for cyber attacks. So, Mary Rose, I guess we're back-to-back good news stories here. This may be unprecedented on the Weekend Review show. I'm curious, do you anticipate the dying out of ransomware due to, decreased payment rates, or are we going to see ransomware gangs kind of, ramp up the severity of enforcement? We've seen an increase in swatting and stuff like that to kind of, hey, got to, put foot on the throat to make them pay. I'm curious, where do you see this going?
I don't have a crystal ball, but here's what I can tell you. I can tell you that this is an ongoing fight, right? There's going to be a push and pull. There's going to be a tug. I agree, though, with some of the suggested mechanisms for curtailing ransomware, like, safe harbor for reporting and things of that nature that was in the article. I wonder, too, about the data. Is it everybody included in this data? What about schools? What about other places? I mean, I know the SEC disclosure rules will probably provide more transparency, but that's only for regulated entities. Regardless, I mean, criminals have been finding ways to, garner, to do things to gain financial gain, like for all of humankind. And so cybersecurity is one of those ways. And I just believe if ransomware is not it, there's going to be something else. I mean, even when ransomware started, there's ransomware and then there's double extortion, and then they will continue on. So the pessimist in me says we got to keep the fight. It's just.
Oh yeah. I mean, I don't seriously think like we'll eventually see it go away, but you're right. There's always that creativity by threat actors to morph, to figure out where your pain points are, exploit those. Even if the payment rate goes down, that might just mean volume goes up or something like that. But still, I'm going to still qualify this as a good news story. And shout out also to David Cross in our chat real quick. He is listening on a Delta flight. His Wi-Fi is good enough to watch this on a Delta flight. David Cross, you indeed are a trooper, so I do appreciate that. Next up here, FBI grounds Vault Typhoon. I'm going to say 3 for 3 good news stories in the rundown today. This is truly remarkable. Perhaps the biggest story of the last week, the Chinese state-affiliated hacking group Vault Typhoon, which created the KV botnet by infecting small office, home office, or SOHO routers and IoT devices for things like reconnaissance and exploitation efforts, was taken down by the FBI in an operation that began in early December. The FBI and CISA also issued guidance for SOHO router manufacturers to secure hardware against continued Vault Typhoon activity, even for end-of-life hardware. That was one of the big things with KV botnet. It was, very classically hitting things that were out of support. So Mary Rose, pairing this with this week's deposition of FBI Director Christopher Wray regarding an increased need for public awareness on vulnerability of our infrastructure. I'm curious, do you think this might be a positive tipping point for proactive defense in depth?
So tipping point is hard to call, because that's usually something we have to see in from a long period of time to really be able to state a tipping point. Like I said, I don't have a good crystal ball. But if I want to pair this with another good news story, is Interpol, right? Interpol's Operation Synergy. I don't know how to pronounce that, quite honestly. But we're talking about over 60 law enforcement agencies taking down cyber criminals in Europe, Hong Kong, and Singapore. So I appreciate, and I actually am very encouraged by the continued action by law enforcement, not just individualistically by country, but also across borders. Now, I have to balance that with, if anyone saw or read the opening statement by Jen Easterly before a House Select Committee hearing just a couple of days ago on China, and it's very sobering there. But yeah, it's positive. It's encouraging to see the actions, and their law enforcement are not letting up. They're continue to stay committed.
Yeah, I was going to say that opening statement shows that CISA is definitely not patting itself on the back with these takedowns that we are seeing. Definitely, though, encouraging to see to see concerted effort. You're right, and even to what we talked about earlier, public-private partnerships that are involved increasingly with these kind of takedowns and stuff like that. I think is very encouraging long term overall for sure. All right, our last story here, civilians in Jordan infected by NSO's Pegasus spyware. A joint report released by digital rights association Access Now and the Toronto-based cybersecurity association Citizen Lab, we've definitely covered their work before in the past, says that the phones of some 36 journalists, human rights advocates, and lawyers in Jordan were infected with Pegasus spyware. According to the record, while the report suggests that Jordan authorities are behind the campaign, the author stopped short of saying so directly. The record goes on to note that a previous Citizen Lab report had confirmed that 2 organizations in Jordan were Pegasus spyware customers. Pegasus is a form of zero-click spyware, meaning that victims don't need to click on anything to be infected. It's why it's pretty popular with the nation-state set. So, Mary Rose, story that you selected for the rundown today, what made this one stand out to you?
So if you think about cyber attacks, like we've talked about so far, it's for financial gain, right? Like the ones that Trojans for against the banking industry. It's as part of warfare, as we all know, that's happening in the geopolitical situations that we have today. This one is attack on the press, is how I saw it. And for me, an attack on the press is a threat to democracy. I mean, the press is almost like your fourth pillar. If you think about the 3 legs of a democratic government, the press is almost like the fourth pillar that holds the rest accountable. And so if you're starting to attack the press, that lends to a much broader intent, malicious intent, if you will, that has a great societal impact. So while we're saying, oh, well, the devices of journalists, people were spying on them, for me, it's much bigger than that, or it might be an indicator to something that's much bigger than that. And that's what I took away from it. That's why this one called my attention.
All right. Well, before we get out of here, Mary Rose, was there any story? Was it this Citizen Lab report? Was there a story here that stood out to you and was a favorite, or made your eyes just roll to the back of your head?
Favorite for me was the AI one from the University of Chicago, right?
Yeah.
I mean, just the ability, because we've heard or read different things about how people are trying to do the watermarking, how both defenders and attackers are trying to use AI, and that one for me was a story of hope.
Yeah, and especially it also reminds you just how early days we are with so much of this, and that like having these kind of tools, I feel like will hopefully feel like table stakes, a couple years down the road. But good to see that we're getting them now. And CCL definitely sharing the love with Citizen Labs and the work that they do over there. We're also seeing some love for Mary Rose, for you, and for just the takes you're dropping here. Sean Kelly is also advocating for you to get to predict the future more. So I think we may need to crowdsource a new crystal ball for you to maybe prognosticate a little bit more. But the one thing I do know is I've had a fantastic time talking with you today. I truly, truly appreciate your time dealing with some technical gremlins and all that stuff. But Mary Rose Martinez, the VP and CISO at Marathon, I really, really appreciate your time. Where can people find you online if they want to keep following you and maybe coax some predictions out of you?
Or you could.
Well, Mary Rose, I'm going to say you can follow you on LinkedIn at Mary Rose Martinez. We have the link in our show notes. So make sure you are following her there. And we will definitely have to have you back on before too long. I truly, truly appreciate your time. Thank you so much, Mary Rose. All right. And thanks also to our sponsor, Vanta, compliance that doesn't suck too much. Also, thanks to our audience today. We can't get to every comment or get them up on the screen, but we really appreciate you being here, participating. CCL, Michael Vinding, Sean Kelly, and even the big boss man himself, David Spark. I really appreciate everybody getting in there and having some fun. We'll be back next week with another Super Cyber Game Show Friday and another Week in Review show. So you can get at. We will have all of your Friday live streams just in your face and having some fun and setting your weekend off on the right tone. And we'll also have, if you just want your daily news fix on a weekday, we've got cybersecurity headlines. Give us about 6 minutes. We'll get you all caught up. Until the next time we meet, I'm Rich Stroffolino, reminding you to have a super sparkly day.
Cybersecurity headlines are available every weekday. Head to CISOSeries.com for the full stories behind the headlines.